Hi, everybody. Mike Hancock here, Chairman of the Circle of Excellence Group of Companies. And today we are featuring Steve Evans, and you'll notice behind his name, OLY. Now, Steve, you should be super proud of me because when I reminded everybody of this today's webinar, I said Steve is an Olympian because once before I wrote Steve was an Olympian, but once an Olympian, always an Olympian. And that's the way it's viewed. And I think I actually think that that's wonderful. It's sort of like once the president of the US, you always have the title of Mr. President or Mrs. President or whatever. So from Steve Evans' point of view, Steve Evans, OLY, and I think it's a wonderful distinction. I still remember the first time I met Steve. He had longer hair than he does now. And, it was probably 6 or 7 years ago. And at that point there, he wasn't able to join us at Circle of Excellence for whatever reasons. And then a few years later, he became a Circle of Excellence Gold member. And that was just fantastic. And I think, we've had just such a great relationship. He and I share similar views on music. So I always love my music conversations with Steve. And I love my sports conversations with Steve as well, because, he's been actively involved in field hockey for most of his life. That's his chosen sport. He's passionate about many sports. And these days, he's the head of the South African Olympic Committee, which is no small task. And I'm sure dealing like I do at the Global Speakers Federation with all the egos of the world, I'm sure Steve experiences the same thing in the Olympic space as well. So, Steve, I don't want to take up any more of your time. Welcome, and it's so great to have you. Over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mike. I'll just make one small adjustment there. So it's president of the South African Olympians Association, not the Olympic Committee. So the Olympic committees basically fall under the National Olympic Committees fall underneath the IOC, and that's all about getting our athletes globally to compete at the games. And then our Olympians Association essentially is looking out for Olympians' welfare around two really important pillars. One is service to Olympians, so helping them transition with education, with business opportunities, and kind of life after sport. And then the second pillar is service to society, where we can use the Olympic platform for the greater good of society. But thank you very much for that kind introduction. And a very exciting topic today. I'm just going to share my screen. So just let me know that you can see everything there perfectly. And essentially what I wanted to do was just to talk to you about team design, right? And how high performing teams come to be, because in most cases, and I think we've all experienced this in some way, shape, or form, our not always the best team ends up winning, and we've probably in business often find ourselves feeling like we should be performing better than what we actually are. So I thought I would just take a couple of stories and experiences that I've had over the course of my career, both playing and coaching, and then apply it in a business context, so that you have some really nice takeaways from today's session. So without further ado, I'll just jump into the next slide. So the key thing really is around these ideas of peak performance, and what does it take in order to get to peak performance. And I think there are two facets to this. The first one is that in order to have collective team peak performance, you have to have individual peak performance. So that's a whole topic for another day. But for the purpose of today, we just want to bear that sort of top of mind. But if we can create space for the people within our businesses and within our organizations, or even within our families, to be firing on all cylinders, and to be able to show up every day and put in their best performance, then the team performance and the collectively becomes significantly more powerful. So I'll just take you back to or not take you back, but just tell you a little bit about my story. So I kind of grew up in a hockey family, and I have two brothers, and my youngest brother and I actually ended up playing together in the 2004 Olympic Games. But I think the main thing is that we had really, really cool role models as parents, who literally lived and breathed the game. And my little brother always joked about the fact that family time for us was driving in the car on the way to the club on a Saturday morning, and driving home on a Sunday evening. But I think it ties into the sort of the first key point, which is that when it comes to building high performance teams, there's three sort of field tested strategies that I want to share with you. It works in all facets of life, both business, sport, and family. Right. And there's a couple of practical things that you'll be able to take away with you this week and implement in your own lives and businesses. So the first story I wanted to share with you was a couple of years after, in fact, 10 years after having competed in Athens in 2004. So this was in 2014, and I was asked to I was asked to actually coach the Peninsula local state team, which essentially was the B team, because it was a super talented group of youngsters. And because it was the start of the Rio 2016 Olympic cycle, all of the international players had come back to South Africa to compete in our provincial or state championship. And as it turned out, it was an opportunity for me to, from the frustrations of some of my own experiences in the international level, that led me to try a couple of things around team design and strategy that resulted in us actually ending up winning the IPT or the provincial championships as a B team, which is the only time ever in history that has been done. I was going to say that it was a little bit like Griquas winning the Currie Cup rugby, but in actual fact, I did some research, and Griquas have won it 3 times from as far back as 1897, when it was a British territory, right the way through to more recent times in the 70s. Nonetheless, I think the key sort of takeaway from my experiences of sport, and that we've all lived, is that the best team on paper doesn't always win, right? Often it's about how people show up on the day. It's the strategies that you use, and it's the way that we compete again in this high pressure environment. So essentially, we've got pressure, we've got constraints, and we've got talent. And then how do we make use of that? So a couple of simple takeaways. We have to clarify roles so that everybody is tuned into what they're doing, how they can contribute to the team. You got to make quick decisions, and you got to simplify things as much as possible for people. And then finally, it's less about the heroics and more around a design process that unlocks peak performance. So the 3 keys for high performance team design that I want to share with you today are, first of all, taking a strengths-based approach, and we'll unpack these as we go. Second one is to make sure that we have a North Star, that there is clarity of purpose and mission. And I know, Mike, you and Lundy are very big on this, and it's the start of our entrepreneurial center, which is understanding our own personal essences and the clarity of that purpose and mission. And then the third one is what I call the flow formula, which allows us to collectively as a team get into flow. So I guess post Olympics, one of the frustrations that I'd had playing in different national teams over the course of my career was, one, trying to understand myself personally, and like where I could add value. And then the second part was around how to apply that in the context of team. And so just after the Olympics, I ended up working and studying with a company in the UK called Speakers International, which was all focused around leadership development. And it was actually a couple of those sort of training experiences that really sort of started to unlock for me um, how peak performing teams are designed and put together. And we've all been through a lot of psychometric testing, I'm sure, and many of us probably end up using it in our coaching work. And one of the most useful ones that I've come across is the Gallup's Strengths Finder test. And for those that are not familiar, you can always go and search Gallup Strengths Test. But what I loved about it, Dr. Clifton, ultimately, I think they've done now more than he was a professor, and he was quite fascinated with it. And he classified 34 strength or talent areas. And then from within that, the premise is that there's roughly about 5 of those strength or talent areas which make up our best, or make up us as a person, and where we sort of would gravitate towards. And I think mathematics is probably the best way to describe this. So, if you were to apply a maximum effort, say 5, with an area where you are talented and or have a strength, you would end up another 5, like you'd end up with 25, right? So you would have a maximum output. If you were to apply that same effort, a 5 effort, but to a talent area where you're maybe a 1, where it's not your best strength, you're going to end up with a very low like 5 score. So I think what I came to realize is that we don't have to be good at everything in life. Okay, but what we can do is where we're deficient, we can supplement our teams with people that are good in those areas where we are perhaps a little bit deficient. So the first thing is really just around understanding your own talent. Okay, and that often relates to also understanding yourself. And then a little exercise that we end up doing is this idea of like introspection and extrospection. In the context of teams, what I loved about the Clifton Strengths Finder is that they were classified these 34 talent areas into 4 strengths domains. Okay, so those are executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking, as you can see from the slide on the left-hand side there. Now, the important thing is, I think in the old days, when it came to sporting team performance, there would be a very high reliance on your team captain or team captain and vice captain to show up and to basically be everything to everybody. So in other words, if that player or that captain was like not quite on form because there's a few off-field factors going on, then how would the team handle sort of their absence per se on the day? So what I did is I developed, using the same principle, a distributed leadership model where essentially you can empower people within your team around those 4 strength areas, so that and more than one person as well, so that in the event that we find, because I think the beautiful thing about sport is that there's a crisis every so often, and the momentum shifts as you kind of go through the game. And business is obviously just an extrapolated version of that. So in the context of team peak performance, what we want to do is we want to make sure that that when the momentum is in a dip, when the opposition is on top, what are the things that we can do to kind of break that momentum and that cycle? One way is strategy. If they've got a really good player that you see that is moving the needle for them, can we put in place a strategy that mitigates that? If it comes to influencing, sometimes people just need that little spur of energy that comes through motivation from people that are really good in that influencer space. Sometimes it's actually more about what's going on off field. So the relationship building, it's the ability to be able to know that, when Mike's just a little bit off his game, what's that like one little thing that I can say to him that will help get him back into a positive mindset and be able to contribute and add value to the team. And then finally, execution. Often, like in a game of hockey in particular, if you've got the ball and you're controlling the ball, you control the game. You can break the momentum. You can't break the momentum of a game if you don't have the ball. So it's like, which players in our team are we going to get the ball to? And I think the same is very, very true of business as well. So when you're thinking about this, the introspection and the extrospection is in a team environment, understanding one, what is your view of self in the context of these strength areas. So in my case, it's around execution and strategic thinking. So I know that I'm going to add the most value to my teams when it comes to creating game plans and getting things done. Then extrospection, where when we're looking at our team design, which are the people that we view within our team that are good in the influencing space? Which is the subgroup of people that are good in the executing space, in the relationship building space, in the strategic thinking space. Okay, and all of those collectively need to be facilitated, and in a way helping people on their journey to understand both themselves and the role that they can play within their team. So just a little exercise for you guys to do is, if you had to think about your own business, and this can apply to life as well, so even like in your family and in your social construct, not only necessarily in business, but it could apply in business, it could apply in even the sport that you end up playing, is how might you restructure or design your teams, and that can include both people that are employed by you and also your contractor roles that you know where you're filling talent and you're bringing talent in from the outside. And how might you structure your teams in a way that they are designed around people's best strengths? So if you just like, you can draw a picture or you can write down just within your team, like what shows up for you when you think about that from a business perspective. Okay, the second point that I wanted to share with you is around this North Star, or your clarity of purpose and vision. So one of the things that I think is so important, and that I'm sure everybody has experienced in some way, shape, or form, is that when you have taken the time, or when a team has a really, really strong team culture, you end up with what we might call attraction. So in other words, people want to become part of that team. And we've all probably experienced the opposite of that, where perhaps it's in a corporate environment where you've joined a business, you're thinking that there's going to be great things coming, and you find that there's a really, really toxic environment. Happens quite a lot in the corporate culture. And so that team culture that has to be nurtured and developed is so important when it comes to the performance of that business or that team, right? And it's something that is intentional and has to be created. And most of that boils down to, again, the purpose and the mission, because if there is alignment and clarity, then people end up getting excited. They bring their best to the party. The second part is what I call core and flex. Okay, so it's about creating rituals that we do week in, week out, similar to training, I guess. But if you were to take it, for example, in the tech world, there's a methodology called agile development, and where you do on a weekly basis your sprint planning. So essentially, it's a daily check-in every day that is called your stand-up, where essentially you are hearing from people within your team, what they're going to do, what they've done, and are there any blockers, and how things can move forward. And then at the end of the week, you would have what would be called a retrospective, which is where you essentially would go, well, how did this week go? Did things plan out according to what we said we were going to do? And it ultimately starts to bring this element of accountability. Interestingly enough, one of the little exercises that I do with the teams, the sports teams that I coach, but again, equally true in business, is often asking people to check in, all right, and essentially to tell me how they're feeling. And I always say that it's actually a listening exercise, not a talking exercise, because it gives this opportunity for us to go, how is Mike feeling after today, because I saw he may have been on fire, or he may have been a little bit off the boil. All right. But Mike says, sure, I'm feeling absolutely like knackered today. Don't know what's going on. And what that does, it's not about a judgment or about what the person says. It's about being able to pick up the conversations outside of the circle, so to speak, and allow especially our relational strength people to have those little one-on-one conversations. And often you might have heard about sort of the idea where often what's happening off field has a significantly big impact of what's happening on field. And so, when things in our life are off kilter outside of the field, maybe I've just had a kid and I haven't slept very much. Maybe I'm under huge financial pressure. Maybe I have just lost a family member. Maybe, I've got somebody close to me that's experiencing cancer or something of that nature. And so all of these off-field things can affect our on-field performance, and the same is true in business. And so how much of the time do we take to actually know and understand the colleagues that we work with on a day-to-day basis? And often just creating this opportunity to check in, where you ask the question, not what do you think, how do you feel right now? I'm feeling tired. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling happy. I'm feeling absolutely on fire. All right. And all of that basically starts to paint this picture for our team in terms of understanding, especially from a coaching perspective, on how we can unblock those blockages. And then the last one that I want to share with you is this idea that much like the king and queen, the team is dead, long live the team. So can I leave the team in a place better than where I inherited it or where I found it? And so in the team culture, we know that there are going to be players that are coming in and out of the team, sometimes on a day-to-day basis or a game-by-game basis, sometimes on a longer term season-by-season basis. But in our businesses, obviously over a little bit of a longer time, we also have the same issue, where ultimately, can we create this culture with such a strong clarity of purpose and mission that everybody is bought in to knowing that they're going to contribute in the role that has been designed for them. And if they were to leave, that we have someone else that we can recruit in that will align and join in and be able to fill that role itself. So, and then I just sort of had put there at the bottom, clarity beats intensity. So often we want to be, energy directed in the wrong direction is not too helpful. All right. And clarity of purpose tends to be, and that North Star metric that we have been speaking about is really what is important for our businesses. Right. So a little exercise we can do here is, how clear are you on your business purpose or personal purpose and mission? And how can you communicate this through to the rest of your team? And I guess maybe even another question is, can your team articulate this? If you were to ask them, what our business purpose and mission is, would your team members be able to say the same thing as you? Mike and Lundy often talk about having your one-liner, play a bigger game. And, does every employee and everyone that interacts with Mike and Lundy, do they know that that's their mission? And of course, the answer is yes, because you see it in the slide behind Mike's head there. You see it in their documentation, and he reminds us on a regular basis that that's his purpose and mission, or their purpose and mission. Right, now we get to the fun stuff, the flow formula. So I think what I've learned over the course of my playing career and coaching career in particular is that roles and responsibilities are so critical. We've often played in teams where the senior players or the super talents are often always looking over their shoulder, worrying about other people and going, "Oh, you're not doing your job properly." Trying to micromanage other people, but they themselves are not performing and doing their own role and responsibility to the best of their ability. And so I talk about role and responsibility as this tool for creating accountability. So accountability means that if there's a role to be done, that I can get that job done, or that role done for the team under pressure, on time, all right, and adding value to in the grander purpose of what our team goal is in a hockey game, to win the match, or to get the points that you need to be able to get through the next round. When you create accountability, that's what builds trust. So as soon as I see Mike performing his role, I don't have to worry about that anymore. I know he's going to show up, and I know he's going to deliver, right? And the same thing is then true for myself, is then I start to become and holding myself accountable to the role that I'm going to play in the context of the team. And then finally, when you create trust, that's what unlocks flow, all right? And that's ultimately where the magic happens. I was actually just lucky enough this week to spend some time with James Tompkins, who is a 6-time Olympian and 5-time gold medalist rowing pair for Australia. So he was in Cape Town, and we had a magic hookup, just walking up Lion's Head and showing him Cape Town. And it was one of those like really, really interesting things, if you've ever watched rowing, is when you get the timing right, and you've got all 8 or the pair or whatever it is pulling together, and everyone is fulfilling their role perfectly, the boat almost like just lifts up and out of the water, and just seems to accelerate. And I think that's like one of the best sort of analogies that I can use for that idea of flow, just where things suddenly just accelerate and up as the boat starts to then plane on the water. Okay, so a little exercise for you now. Perhaps write down a couple of key roles and accountabilities in your life and or in your business that might unlock flow. And I think also, like in my case, I'm a father of 3. So life in our family context is very busy, but we apply the same principles to family life as we do to business. And that's knowing like which areas am I strong at, and how can I add value in our family context? How can my wife Teresa do the same thing? From the kids' perspective, how can they make sure that the roles and the tasks that they're assigned to do, that they can be accountable to doing that, and so that our family can ultimately operate in a context of peak performance. So then I just wanted to round it all out, and just to say that it doesn't matter what the context of life is. We interacting with people all the time, and more often than not in the context of teams. And even if you're an individual athlete, you still have a team of people around you supporting you. And it's super, super important to make sure that, one, you have that aligned clarity of purpose. 2, that you're intentional about the design of both the people and the construct of your business to support everybody in bringing their best game forward. And then 3, that you can design your team with intention so that you can make magic happen. So that's what I've got for you this morning. We are just on the half hour, so I'm sure there'll be lots and lots of questions because there's many stories more that I could share with you, but I think let's see what turns up in the chat there, Mike.
Thanks, Steve. Really, really appreciate that, and great presentation. I love the quality of your slides, actually. So well done there. I really like this whole green sort of and gold theme that you've got going on there. Very, very South African. So well done. And I think you just brought up so many good points. And one of the ones that I want to pick up with people, which I actually put in the chat, so you'll see a lot of things in the chat of mine, has anyone ever done a team design for their business? And you ask that question, or do you just think that you can't because then you're going to have to pay a bunch of people? So I'm interested in some opinions about this, but and then I'll maybe give you a hint. Has anybody done? Let's Steve, we'll just remove your
just
slide so I can see
Yeah,
see
sorry, I
everyone.
was just trying to
No problem.
find the button. It disappeared on me. Have you removed it?
It's all right,
hang on,
I'll do it.
Sorry, I got it. There we go.
Done it. Okay, so and I'll unpin you for a minute. So has anybody actually done a team design exercise for themselves in their own business? Ian Hatton, yes. Tell me about it.
Yeah, I follow a process of why, then who, then and then how, and I'll explain that because it's not quite the way we often think of how. But the why is what is our purpose as a team? Why do we even need to be together? Why do we need this team? And for me, that's absolutely central. It lays the foundation of trust and various things. And then I work on the who, and the who goes into who wants to volunteer which strengths to that purpose. And I do a lot of work around that, and that's that I find really gets people focused in. You know, Marcus Buckingham says we think sometimes that a team is structured around everybody must just do what it takes. And actually, it's everybody should volunteer their strengths. Plan B is doing what it takes. It's like, you know, you don't put the guy who's built like a scrum half to be the prop in a rugby game, but every now and then the scrum half is under the scrum and the prop has to be the one who fishes the ball out and passes it on, you know. So it's a plan B, it's never the plan A. So you're always working towards strengths. And then the how is, how do we want to be together to achieve this purpose? And it's a lot of the stuff that Steve talked about around you know, those check-ins and retrospectives and all of that kind of stuff. And how do we handle conflict, decision making? So yeah, I've done that for my business, and I'm busy putting the people in place as we grow. But every person who comes along, we have that conversation.
Wonderful. Agnes, I see your hands up. Thanks, Ian.
Yes, thank you, Mike. I haven't done a team design analysis as such, but as I put in the chat, I work in a public administration, and I'm responsible for a team of translators. So the core business is the same for everyone. But whenever there is a special task, like for example, we have a new colleague and I'm looking for a mentor, I look at the strengths of the team, and I also look at the personality of the newcomer, and look for a good match between the two persons. And it has been working very well. Because it also gives people an opportunity to grow, to say yes to a task they might not volunteer for, but when asked to do it, then they, okay, I will do it, and then they realize that they have the skills to do it. They also learn. So it's good for the development of the individual, and also it's good for the performance of the team. I find it very, very beautiful.
Very, very good. Thank you. Thank you so much. Now, Diane Demetri's got her hand up, but before she speaks, Lindsay, I just want you to know she was so inspired by your GSS conference in Cairns that she's decided to move up to Port Douglas. So that's all because of you, right? Or maybe she just wanted to get further away. We don't know yet. Okay, Diane, all over to you.
Okay. And Lindsay, very good backdrop you've got there, by the way. Okay. In my previous life, which is still in this lifetime, we had a business of 250 staff, although it feels like a previous lifetime. We had a business of 250 staff across the 4 states here in Australia. And as the general manager, my role was recruitment, training, and looking after all of the human resources, and then also compiling a quality management system manual of 285 pages. So one of the things I found, and by the way, Steve, thank you very much. I really enjoyed that. That was great. And one of the things that I found was, as far as teams and building the teams, was it all comes back to the very beginning of recruitment. So I would have a very, very specific recruitment interview process. And I would, once we went through it and we built rapport, it was always about why. Why are you here? Why are you sitting in that chair? And so if they said, well, we need a job, well, we'd keep drilling down. So by the time we were finished, it was always 5 times why. And then from there, I would lead them through various scenarios to see how they would respond and had they ever had those scenarios before. And then at the very end, if I had an inkling that I thought that they could be right, I would then drill down into some personal aspects that I suppose today I wouldn't be allowed to do. But back then, I would ask personal questions about their philosophy on life and how they saw life, so that I would get an understanding of whether they could A, take responsibility for their actions, B, would they be able to have relationships with other people without being offended, and so on and so forth. So I found that that process, being really, really strict on recruitment, gave me a far better chance and opportunity of finding the right people for the right teams across the country. And it worked, because in a 12-year contract, we had less than 5% attrition rate of our staff. So I take that as a bit of a tick that the process worked, and in our training then that helped them move forward also worked. So that's how we did it.
Thank you, Diane. And you know, there are more than 4 states in Australia, but we won't pick you up on that one. I know what you mean.
No.
So, Steve, I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back to you in a second. I just want to mention a couple of things. Firstly, some things that are relevant here that are just popping up for me. Firstly, many of you want to know more about people, okay? And whether it's in your own recruiting, whether it's in your team, whether it's in your clients' teams, etc. You have Lindsay here on the call. Lindsay has a business called 24/7 Assessments. He has a range of different assessments that you can utilize with your team. So, Lindsay, I'll get back to you in a minute and you can make a quick statement about that. The second thing I wanted to mention here is, you know, we're hearing great comments from all different sorts of people. We've got, you know, Agnes here, who's currently living in Brussels, although, you know, she does travel extensively. So if you want to know about the European market, you know, you might want to tap into Agnes and ask her a couple of questions. You've got Diane here, who's in Australia and in Queensland in Australia, which is a real bit of it's a bit of a bubble as far as Australia goes, in terms of it doesn't operate like the New South Wales or Victoria in many respects. So there's different people here you can tap into to get your own feedback. And one more thing, Steve, and then I'm going to ask you a specific question. Lundy and I did this exercise a number of years ago in team development, and it worked really well. We imagined that the Circle of Excellence group was a human body. So we said, who's the heart of this group? Who's the eyes of this group? Who are the feet of this group? Who's the hands of this group? Et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, in some cases, who's the pooper in this group? But you know, all jokes aside, I think it actually really helped us look and say to ourselves, well, at that point, you know, we didn't have enough heart, okay, in the business. So it helped us address that particular thing, which was really fundamental to our overall direction and strategy. Steve, out of what the feedback that you've heard from the different people that have been speaking, my question to you is, what cropped up for you as being something that you think that you would like to drive home as a point that came out of all of that?
Yeah, I think, well, 2 things. The first one is that sometimes we also, in a business context, we can, to a certain extent, choose the people that are going to work for our businesses. And sometimes in sport, probably a little bit less so. It's like you get talented individuals, but that are, you know, that maybe are quite tricky from a personality perspective. And so in either case, I think the most important thing is that you create affordance and space for people to interact socially, so that you get like a layer down then, and that probably like alludes to the, you know, to the 5 whys that Diane had mentioned, I think it was. So yeah, so that was the first one. And then the second one, I think, is, again, just coming back to that idea of clarity of purpose. So the clearer that we are in ourselves in terms of not only how can I add value to this team, but what is that team purpose, and then is there alignment between those two things? So those are really the sort of the two key points that I think one just has to bear in mind. And perhaps also just throwing it out there is, especially in the sports context, but perhaps in the business context too, we may have that superstar that can be a real asset, but often there's a personality like that actually can be as equally destructive as they can be positive. And often it's around how we manage that personality. And I think that's really the art of a great CEO or a great coach or manager, is this ability to manage people. And so, in my opinion, we need to be spending, as much time and energy on the design and construct of our team and building our business and our team cultures as we do on finding the right people to fit in to that team.
Yeah, very well said. And you made me think about Shane Warne, the great Australian cricketer, probably, arguably the best Australian cricketer of all time, apart from Donald Bradman. And, he was a pretty difficult character, but some people managed him very, very well. And when they did, that's when I think, they got the best out of him and the best for the team. And, through his initial difficulties, he became a very likable person in the end for people. So it's interesting that sometimes, people just have to grow on you, and sometimes it just takes time. Another thing that popped up for me was when you're in a team and the role that you play in a team as well. And I know many of you are on committees and different charities and things like that, and you're giving back. And I always find it very interesting, and Lindsay, you'll probably laugh at this, but when not the past president, but the president before that of the Global Speakers Federation was handing out tasks to do, she gave me my task and I just said, I'm not doing it. And she laughed and said, but don't you want to be part of this? I said, and my response was, out of everything that I can do you really feel that that's the best use of my ability? And it made her stop and think, and she went, actually, no, you're right. She said, what do you think the best use of your ability is in this project? And I said, I think the best use of my ability is that. She said, okay, Mike's going to do that. We'll find somebody else to do what I just gave him. So, also having being prepared to have those feedback loops. And when one of your staff comes to you and says, I'm not really good at that, or I don't really enjoy it, or I know I'm going to, drop the ball, if they're totally honest, having the faith to say, okay, let's make a plan here and let's work around this. Lindsay, do you just want to mention some of the how people can utilize profiling to understand more about teams and to access more about teams generally?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think it's really interesting what the discussion we've had so far, and I often say we have to understand ourselves first and then move to understand others. And that's part of the work that I do in organizations, but I also help others do using different profiling tools. And one of the simplest tools that I use is the DISC assessment. Now, DISC, first written about by William Moulton Marsden in 1926. Been around for a long time, but it's bloody good. It's simple. It's a 4-quadrant model. People get it quickly. Years ago, I studied the Myers-Briggs type indicator, 16-fold model, thoroughly confusing. I've done some work with the Enneagram. Does your head in? Don't go there. It's
South Africans love it.
Yes, I'm well aware of that. And so they're all strange people that live in South Africa, clearly. They prefer complexity over simplicity. And so, I think no matter what it is, it's about creating a common language within the team. And so, if you use some sort of tool, whether it be DISC or one of the others, it's about understanding, as I said, understand self first, then go to understand others, and we create a common language in the team so that we go, oh yes, that's right, Mike, I forgot, you're the driver in the team no matter what. You're the one who's going to, take charge and run hard with it. Now I understand why you're doing what you do. Whereas, Diane is probably the ideas person, and she's got a whole bunch of creative ideas and different ways of doing things. So again, it's about understanding the other people and then utilizing the tools or the talents that they've got, to bring everyone together. So there's a different, there's hundreds and hundreds of these profiles out there. If you're not sure, we're lovely. We'd be only too happy to have a conversation with you and point you in the right direction.
Yep, and I know you've got dozens of those tools available to you at 24x7assessments.com, right?
.com, yep, .au, .com.au.
.com.au. Back to you, Steve, and then to Agnes.
Cool. Yeah, just a very interesting thing that resonated as you were talking there, Lindsay, is often, well, not often, but in the context of my own personal career, which was not in the end was 96 test matches. Most of that career was spent effectively like learning the trade, but actually playing in a position where I wasn't utilizing like my best skills. So I was almost like plugging holes within the team. So it's like, Steve, you can play left half, but left half wasn't my best position. Right midfield was my best position. And it took me until probably like into the sort of 60 plus test matches when I started realizing that I actually need to make decisions around becoming the best right midfield in the country, so that I could add value to South Africa on the international stage. So that was one really important thing. The other one, which was tied back to the sort of idea of the common language, is also understanding. At the time, I look back on through the course of my career and the different coaches that I had interactions with, and I didn't realize that I was doing it. But as I mentioned to you, I'm a sort of a strategic, analytical person. Those are my two top strengths. And so under certain coaches, which were maybe a little bit deficient in terms of their like tactical knowledge or so on, I'm like seeing things in real time, but I'm 18 years old. And both my teammates and the coach are going like, who's this youngster that, thinks that they know everything. And I kept on asking these really tricky questions, going, well, like, why aren't we doing this or what it is? And so I only realized much later in my career that that was a contributing factor in terms of, also being in and out of the team, because I wasn't aware that I was, putting the coach in a difficult position by asking difficult questions. But it comes back down, I think, ultimately as well to the common language that you talk about, Lindsay, where often as a little exercise with new teams, I go, think of the color blue. And, one person's thinking of navy blue, another person's thinking of azure. So everyone's got their own kind of flavor and their own version. And so the tighter that you can get on the common language, and that kind of relates back to that North Star metric, that clarity of purpose, where everybody now, when you say blue, is thinking of earth blue, in Mike's background color there.
Thanks, Steve. Agnes, over to you.
Thank you. Listening to you, Steve, I remembered an interview back in 2006 after the Football World Cup, which was won by Italy. And Cannavaro, the team captain, was asked afterwards, how did you win the World Cup? You did not have one single superstar on the team. And you beat all the teams with one or even more superstars. And he said, because we had the best team. We had the best team where everybody fought for the same purpose. Everybody did his best on the post where he was playing, and this is how we won the World Cup.
100%.
And it
Wonderful.
was 2006, and I still remember it. It stayed with me.
That's how prominent it is. Well, Steve, thanks again for being on today's call. We really, really appreciate it, and we appreciate everyone being here.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
No problem.